topic today is about the self-talk that we have. And for a lot of people, it's the negative self-talk that can get in the way of them thriving and living their best life. There are also people that have a lot of positive talk, and it's going to be interesting to explore essentially the role ID plays in all of that. Now, just before we get into today's topic, just a couple of announcements. First of all, I'd just like to welcome everybody to the call. I know this is a new experience for a whole bunch of you. There has been a lot of interest to the topic. This is something we do every month. So what we do is we have the first seminar of the month, we pick the topic. So in this case, it's about self-talk. And we have what we call a living in stride. So it's a general presentation from me and a conversation around the topic and the link with ID. Then 2 weeks later, we have what we call the ID Masterclass. And that's for people who really want to dig into the nuances of ID and of these specific topics. Often it's our coaches and practitioners, but it's open to anybody that would just like to really build their knowledge and capability on ID and also just be a part of this community. I think as time's gone on, we've been doing this for the 3 years that COVID's been around. As time has gone on, people have really built a community here and feel that they've got a new resource for who they can tap into to have these types of conversations. So a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, sorry, go the other way. A couple of things coming up. So that masterclass that I just mentioned is on May 17, that's the US date, and May 18 in Australia. You will see the advertisements and the emails coming out for it. But if you want to already attend and dig into the topic based on what you see today, it's the same time. It's just, it'll be on the 17th of May for America and the 18th for Australia. We also have a couple of certifications coming up that I know a number of you have expressed interest in and want to know the dates for. So we've been specifically asked to do one on the EMEA timeframe, EMEA and Asia Pac. So we have that coming up in June. So what we do is we have 2 days back to back for our certification program. And then we have a space for people to go away and apply a lot of what they've learned. And they come back, basically 10 days to 2 weeks later to do the final day. And that's where there's new material, but it's also where they get to hone in on what they've been applying. Then we have the one that's geared to the US coming up again in August, 9, 10, and 23. So I saw Vanessa, you clapping because I know Infoblocks has been one of the people that's been asking us to have the EMEA one, and you've got a whole bunch of people you want to have come along. So they're the dates. I'm sure we'll be in touch with you shortly to, wrap all that up with you. But that's all on the slate. The next thing is the US, what we just had at the end of March in Australia was our one-day conference. We have that coming up on the 2nd of November in the US. We're still formulating the actual location of it. It's probably going to be around the Silicon Valley area, where it's sort of our epicenter there at the moment, where there's a lot of activity and that's where a lot of our people are. So it'll probably be somewhere around that location, but you might want to just keep that date. And I mention that to you because in the US in particular, in Australia, so much of our work is on the East Coast, but and all of our people that would attend. But in America, there's a lot of dispersed coverage, and so if you want to look for a reason to maybe line up other things, business or personal, to make that a potential trip for you on the November 2nd, and we'd love to see you there on that day. The one other announcement that's not on here is that we've had several requests to now start doing this webinar on the EMEA time zone. So we've got a lot of people in India and also through EMEA where this is the wrong time of day for them. And so I've been talking to my team about kicking that into play, and it's probably going to be around the July timeframe. So it'll be the same topic, a totally different group of people, but at least if you know that's coming up and talk to anyone, let them know that that's going to be coming online from the middle of the year. And then finally, we have been working on, I think most of you know this, but the ID platform that you currently would jump into as your portal to get your ID resources, whether it's your own reports or particularly looking up other people or looking at team cultures, that is going through a significant upgrade. We're right in the beta test phase of that now, and we're looking at having that released in Q3. So that's anywhere from July to September. We're trying to make that happen as early in July as we possibly can. So stay tuned. It's very exciting. It's a fantastic upgrade. I'm really excited by what I've seen. Has some really interesting capability. I know you will love it, and we'll probably showcase it to this group ahead of time. But I'm just always careful of, how we use the precious time that we have here with you guys and making sure it's more about you than it is about us showcasing things. But I know if we might even put on the separate session or something for you if you want to have a sneak peek, So that's what's going on our side of the fence. Are there any questions before we move into today's topic? Just be aware that you might be on mute and you might need to unmute yourself if you have a question to ask. Feel free to use the chat as well. It becomes an equally popular part of the webinar as much as the dialogue that goes on here. So feel free to use that as well. Okay, so let's move into today's topic. So we're going to cover a few different things here. The whole concept of self-sabotage and what causes it, the role ID plays, like how much of it comes from your ID and how much of it doesn't. Is that even a possibility? We'll dig into that. And then no matter what, how can you use your ID to have a much healthier internal narrative that goes on? I thought a great place to start was to tell you why this topic actually came to be. So when we had our conference, and so Ian, this is where I'm going to, involve you here, just to give you a little heads up. So when we had our conference back at the end of March, Ian very kindly, so Ian, for those of you who don't know, is on our team here in Sydney, and Ian volunteered to run a tour of the city for those people interested to do the tour. And there was a whole lot of people went, and he played not just a tour guide, but the feedback, because I wasn't there, the feedback was that he did an amazing job, both of the coverage of the city, but the way he did it. And I spoke to Ian afterwards and I said, geez, Ian, there's a lot of feedback about what you did. Like, you were shining there. Maybe you should think about being a professional tour guide. I said, on a scale of 0 to 10, from a peak performance point of view, what were you? And he said, a 10, absolutely a 10. So Ian, I'm not sure where you want to come in here and share your story, but what was interesting was what followed, because I said to you, it's interesting you say that you're a 10. You don't normally say that you're a 10. Do you remember what happened then? What you shared with me?
Yeah, actually, thanks, Paul. I said, well, this is where the negative self-talk comes in. I sort of, when you sort of have this, it was an amazing night, and it was a combination of the people, everyone, and for me, if like, can see my ID 8363, the plan just worked. So I'd had a plan. I'd actually planned a lot of this beforehand. It did shift because our session ran over in the afternoon, so the time I wanted to get there didn't work. But as it turned out, it actually worked out even better because it enabled us to go to a bar that was a brand new bar in Sydney that had some really spectacular views over the harbour, different views that people typically see. So it was just like everything that happened was like, it was just perfect in every way. And the team really loved it. And even the people from Sydney were going, wow, I didn't know that, and I hadn't seen that. So I was just getting sort of like some really great feedback all the way. So it was, as I say to Paul, it was an easy 10. It was just, that just couldn't have been better. And he said to me, he's like, why don't you sort of think like that all the time? And I said, I just have this thing in my head that sometimes when something's so perfect, like, what's going to go wrong? There's something's going to happen, and it's it's like, if things are going really, really well, you just think, when's something bad going to happen? When's the negative going to happen? And it's just something I've had all my life. And we were having this conversation, and I shared it with him. He's like, why do you think that? I said, I don't know. But I said, I've always thought that. I said, it's when things have been going too well for too long, I'm waiting. It's almost like waiting for the axe to fall. Something's going to happen. So it didn't. So we proved it wrong, but it's still that self-talk that goes on. So it was an interesting point, and hence we sort of explored it a bit more and thought it'd be a great topic to talk about with the team. So here we go.
And thank you, Ian. And I hear it so often from other people. I remember a golfer winning a major championship, and he was having a string of success, and they said, like, what are you doing? And he said, well, I don't know, but you've got to sort of make hay while the sun shines. You know, it won't last forever. And so there was like that narrative inside that's like, it's only temporary, you know. And I know there are so many of these narratives that are on. And I saw a massive difference in Ian between, you know, you're always in stride. You know, you seem like you're always saying, well, you're an 8 out of 10. You might say you're a 9. But to see you absolutely shining was a thrill to everyone. I think they got as much out of seeing you on fire as much as they did from the tour that you gave. And the difference was the voice. It wasn't really what you're doing. It was the voice in the head, because once you let go of that on that night and you just sort of let it rip, I mean, that's what really was the turning point. And I'm like, I wonder how true that is for so many people. And what's the role of ID here? Is it linked? Is it because of the way you were raised? Or is there actually something with ID? Like, are certain IDs more vulnerable to negative self-talk than others? Are some immune to it? Are some people, you know, filled with positive self-talk because of their ID, separate to the way they've been raised? And there were just all these questions that I had. I've been talking to people about it for the last month, you know, and it's been crazy to me how many people have got a lot of self-talk and all the different potential linkages to ID. So that's what we're going to unpack today. And that's, thank you, Ian, for firstly doing such a great job with the team, but also just being, you know, open to explore the difference between, if you like, being a 9 out of 10 and then that 10 out of 10 and that the self-talk tarnishing it. So let's, the first thing I would say to you is, let's just get some definition around the concept of self-sabotage. What I can tell you first up is that they're definitely, one of the roles ID can play is whether you're in stride or out of stride. But let's talk about what it all means. So there are a few things I thought of here, just thinking of this on a scale of, I think your ID can play a part, but so do the environments. You talk about being nature and nurture, and there's no question. In fact, when you read up on self-sabotage, there's a lot to do with, you know, the environmental influences. They're not talking so much about people being born or having any innate traits that would make them like this. So much of it is to be whether you've had, you know, trauma, whether you've suffered abuse, whether there's been violation of trust, or in fact, violation of anything. You know, that's been people that grow up in environments where there's a lot of criticism and restraint and negativity. I mean, they embrace that, right? So I think there's worth saying, well, there probably is a role that a lot of the environmental factors play. Equally, on the positive side, the people that are more secure and self-empowered have typically environments that are much healthier. And whether that is because they're loving and encouraging, you know, they've got people who really believe in them, breathe oxygen into them, or they've just never experienced some of those negative situations. The point is they've generally got a positive or a lack of negativity. But what we want to really dig into today is the piece about in stride and out of stride. We're not here to be the experts on the whole topic. It's more about the role of ID in this space. And so much of what we find starts with the point about whether you're in stride or out of stride. And one of the questions, a whole number of you, there's probably 15 people sent questions ahead of time. And one of the common things about the questions that you presented was, can I turn my negative self-talk somehow into something positive? And we are going to get into that today. But what we know is you've got a much better chance of being able to do that if you're in a place of in stride. If you're out of stride, and for those of you who may not have seen our model, this is the model that we talk about of being in stride. We call it our peak performance indicator. And what we say to people is, if being in stride is that green arrow running up the middle of the page, I've put that person's ID here. You can see they're like 5833. Put it here because when that person is being true to themselves, true to their ID, that's when they're on the middle arrow. And the things here at the top of the page are what you experience. So if you want to experience yourself in flight, you know, thriving with great confidence and success, that happens when you are aligned to your ID. But if you get pulled out of stride, not only do you compromise all of these beautiful things at the top of the page, you start to experience forms of stress and distress, but also it impacts your whole mindset around having the courage, the confidence to speak up, the confidence to try, and the negative self-talk is going to be more prevalent for people that get pulled out here to the right and to the left than the people who are really in stride. So that's one thing to think about before you really start applying our strategies, is just the strategy of how in stride are you. So if you say to yourself with your negative self-talk on a scale of 0 to 10, well, I'm probably a 4 or a 5, then that's just going to propel the self-talk. If you what you want to do is get to a really positive place, as well as using some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So let's dig into the role your ID plays. So the first part is about being in stride and out of stride. But then the question I had, and before I dig into it, I just thought I'd maybe ask you here, do you think some drives are more vulnerable to self-sabotage? Or for that matter, being more self-empowered? Are some drives maybe more, positive, more robust, more optimistic? What are your thoughts around that? Do you think it's equal? Or do you think that there maybe are some drives that are more vulnerable to
it? Paul, I know as a 70 Verify, one of my vulnerabilities is judgment, being judgmental. And I find that, that self-sabotage can be brutal sometimes. And, I think it's only through experience and my onion skins where I've learned to kind of balance that self-talk around, so what does this mean? What do I learn from it? And what do I mean? But I know when I was younger, it was, there were some days it was debilitating, really, really impactful from a social perspective in engaging people, because I just felt like I wasn't good enough. Yeah.
So you're sort of giving a hands up that, well, maybe it's a vulnerability of the verifiers, and then and so I go the same place, Grant, and then I sort of go, okay, does that mean that avoid verifiers don't have negative self-talk? And then so I would ask someone like Krista McDermott, who's do you have negative self-talk, Krista?
Me? No, never.
Right. So this is how I did the research with ID guys. This is how I developed the drives. So I hear of a particular trait and I think, oh, does that mean that other people don't have it? And there were some areas where they don't, but there were things like this where you go, no, I have it. I have it for different reasons. I might have the opposite ID to you, but the issue of self-sabotage, or the issue of lacking confidence or whatever it might be. So I'm like, okay, so that's not unique to at least that drive. So then I'd move on and I'd go, okay, what about with the authenticate or the complete or improvisers? Do you guys have negative self-talk?
I mean, I think for me, it's, and I've watched this across a lot of, obviously across a lot of IDs. And I think it's easier to, particularly to fall into a sort of almost a stereotype about more to do with the use complete and avoid improvise, because if they're looking for things that can play out and those things include risks or negative impacts, it kind of loads you up a lot more. If I try to just go back to the avoid verify on its own, it's interesting because I think a lot of it, one of the biggest insights for me around when I first did my ID, even though it's not my strongest drive, is that, I had a lack of confidence around explaining very strongly held views, but in a very articulate way that satisfied those driven to verify. And I think, that gives me a lot of negative self-talk in terms of, I know what I mean, I feel it, I know that I'm right, and I can't articulate it, but maybe does that mean that I'm wrong, or my opinion's not as strong as this, and it's not as valid, and I'm not as clever, and so there's that aspect of it for me.
Yeah, exactly. It's where you go to. Thanks, Krista. So look, guys, in the interest of time, I'm just going to fast forward this because there's some really meaty things I want to dig into with you today. one of the beautiful things about ID that I love is the equality, that it's not related just to one drive. Like if it's being felt by one drive, it sure as hell being felt by the other 3 or the other 6 in terms of the directions. It's not always obvious and you've got to go digging for it, but I do love that it covers all drives. So let me share with you some thoughts around that. One of the things I did want to just remind you of was when I was preparing for this, I noticed in our material, when we talked about early warning signals, yes, it can play out in your health ultimately. If you're really out of stride, it can show up in your health. But we did have negative self-talk as one of the things that happens earlier on. Like the first thing that can often show up is your emotional state, and then the internal dialogue that goes on. So if you notice that you're not normally having that negative self-talk and you start to have it, or it starts to become a little noisier inside your mind, that can also be one of your clues as an early warning signal that you're heading out of stride. So just keep that in mind as well. I'm just trying to, integrate some of our earlier learnings that we've gone on with as well. And for those of you who are new, all of these webinars are published on our website and on our YouTube channel. So Ian, maybe you can, when you send out this recording, we can put the link to where those channels are, make it easy for people to find them. Because if you want to go back and dig into some of these earlier conversations, that might be very useful for some of you as well. But let me show you this. We often present, in terms of the equality of drives, we often present in using a matrix like this, the design of the feedback, right? So the way we use the matrix is, if you take that person with their 5833 ID and you look at all the comments on the 4 different drives here, the person who's got the 8 in authenticate would look at the things up here at the top and say, do I relate to these? And they'd also look at the avoid complete and the avoid improvise categories. But you primarily go to where your strongest drive is. So see how for this person, their strongest drive is, meaning the longest drive, is the authenticate drive. This section up here will probably have more influence than the 2 down the bottom because it's their stronger drive. That's how we use this. And I just put this together based on some of the conversations that I've been having over the last month, different comments I hear people say, just to provoke our conversation today. So Christy's our product development person. You can relax. I wasn't trying to be equal here on all the drives. I'm not saying that the improvisers don't have as much as much commentary here as, say, the avoid verifiers, for example. I'm really leaving this open for us to work through today, and through the sharing that we have this week and in a couple of weeks' time, we will round out this as a little tool that you can maybe draw on to have as a reminder both the negative narratives, the self-sabotaging narratives, and I have a similar slide on the positive things you can do to turn them into the positives. We'll cover that shortly. But I'll just give you a minute to look through this. And I'm going to jump from this slide to another one with more on it. Let me do that now. It'll look different. I had to do it on a different format because our template wouldn't let me sort of move the slide around. But I wanted to capture some of the words so the blue here is what wasn't on the previous slide. But just take a second to digest these and look at where your ID is and see if you either relate to anything here, or you might want to finesse it, or you might want to have new things to add. Like I thought of another one this morning for the completers where they say, oh, I always get nervous before I got to present. I was talking to someone earlier and they said, oh, I always get nervous. And I'm like, well, of course you do. I mean, if that's part of your routine and that's one of the conversations going on in your mind, then that's, I always fail, I always get sick. I remember coaching a swimmer one time who said to me, she drew a map and her training session was sort of really low in August. This is like in March. And she had hardly anything going on in August. And I said, what's going on in August, Katie? And I said, are you away? And she said, no, I get sick. I always get sick in August. And she was an 8 incomplete. And I'm like, oh, of course you do. Of course you do. So we'll talk about August in a minute. But, if you always do something, then of course you always will. So one of the vulnerabilities of the complete drive, for example, is when it says things like I always, or nobody likes me, or nobody will come, or everyone hates me. And it might have only happened twice, but it soon becomes the overwhelming sort of statement. So they're just examples of what I've heard people say, and I'm trying to put them in their different categories. And you might actually have a different drive and say, well, that applies to me, like the whole point about whether it's judgment or being silly or something. You could equally put that up here with improvise, but maybe you might use different wording as well. So what I'm curious to dig into, I just wanted to put this here to give you some thought starters, but I'd really appreciate, and I think the value in the group today is for you to be able to speak to being authentic and vulnerable with our little community here for you. And maybe you want to talk about it from even your whole ID. Is there a conversation like what Ian said, where he said, when things are going really well, it's like I'm waiting for something to fail. Like that's my common thing. Like it's not over yet. Something could go wrong. So it tarnishes his ability to fully enjoy it. And Grant, you said a similar thing, but from a different angle when you were introducing it. So let's open it up to you guys to share. What is the conversation that you find is often the thing going through your mind? And can you see where it fits with your ID? Maybe using what I've got on the screen here just to provoke some of your thinking. Who would like to go first?
It's interesting for me that a lot of the complete ones don't land. But if you see the what if, you can like magnify that by, to the power of 100. Yeah.
And maybe, Krista, they don't land for you, so
yes, yeah.
And I would say for different people, as they become more self-aware and more secure in themselves, some of these things, this is definitely not saying that if you have any one of these 8 directions, and of course you'll have some of them, that they absolutely apply to you. No, that's not what I'm saying. Not at all.
And I see some of the always one I see in other use complete, and the nobody, everybody scenarios.
Yeah.
And I was going to say the avoid, authenticate, what do others think?
Yeah.
If I don't do that, what are they going to think? If I don't do that, what will they think?
Yeah.
And I find myself doing things. I was like at the gym this morning, and it's like, if you don't put your weights away, what are others are going to think? It's like it's probably what's the right thing to do as well kicks in. But there's that, I've actually gone back and I've forgotten to do something, and I've gone back and done it afterwards because what would others think? People I don't know.
I remember someone saying to me, I'm a 1 in authenticate, so if anyone's going to get sort of burdened by that element, it's me. And I remember someone saying to me years ago, Paul, people think about themselves 95% of the time. So if they're going to think about other people, you've got to fit into the 5% that's left over. And frankly, they're not thinking about you in that 5%. It's all in your head, and that was liberating for me to realize that, how true that is. So yeah, good point.
But I have a version of that, and which is, what's this going to look like to others? Like, this isn't the look we're going to want to have, So sorry, am I coming through?
You are, Greg. You are.
Yeah. So it's like, what's this going to look like is a thing for me. Like, how's it going to? And of course, that's not going to do. That's not the doing that we came here to do. If that's a way of saying that, So I'm worried that it's not going to give the right message.
And is that? Do you feel like that's a self-sabotaging narrative?
Well, that's what I'm wondering. I'm thinking that mine are more like I'm sabotaging others. Like I'm really more disappointed with it not working. It's like my comments are like, "What the hell were you thinking?" I'm trying to think of what I do to put myself down. And it's more like worrying that I'm not delivering what that we were here to deliver. So yeah, I guess. But my sword goes both ways.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I'm curious about the avoid, improvise. You guys are deep thinkers in process. And I was just having a conversation with somebody today around speaking up in a meeting and what holds them back and speaking up in meetings. I'm curious about what some of that self-talk would be around that for an avoid, improvise.
I would answer that, but someone has their hand up first. I'm not sure if you want to go there first, Paul.
Well, yeah, thank you. Angela, I can see your hand is up. You're on mute, but would you like to, I see you're an improviser, but what would you like to share?
Bring this. Am I coming through?
You are.
Yep.
You are.
So I'm kind of shocked that there's only one bullet. There's only one bullet because there's constant negative self-talk. I mean, it's something that I have worked on, and it's one of the things that ID has helped me to manage over the decade or so that since I've been exposed to ID. But a couple of them that I mentioned that I have to manage is that I'm too much. And that could be in whatever flavor. I talk too much, I think too much, I have too many ideas, okay, turn it off now, they're gonna get sick of you. I mean, it's all this stuff. So the impression maybe that Use Improvise don't have this and are perpetually positive is could not be further from the truth.
No, and that's not saying that this is just that I didn't get that from people. I would agree with you. There's as much, but each of the 8 directions, I just wasn't getting any. So I thought I'd leave that open for exactly what you just said. For this community to be able to share and say, "Oh no, I'm as vulnerable as anybody else. Here's what happens to me." And some of the examples you're giving are excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, and Paul, if I could just mention one other thing, because I just kind of, it came to me as I was thinking about this, is that ID is your drive, right? So the fact that you're driven to do something does not mean that you're always comfortable in being driven, right? Like I am driven to make things right. Let me use a better one. I'm driven to be creative. But sometimes I'm like, okay, stop now. Just be okay with what it looks like and not continually improve on it. So it's a drive that sometimes I wish I could turn down.
Yeah, well, I think like all of us, we need to learn sometimes to manage our drives. I mean, for example, I can tell you as a verifier, it might be the nature and the driver of a verifier to ask a lot of questions. But when it gets to analysis paralysis, or those questions become questions that, annoy other people, then there's nothing worse than a verifier that doesn't know they're a verifier, So being aware, that's what we call it, self-awareness is key. And with that comes self-governance, which is knowing how to manage so many elements of your ID. We're talking today about self-sabotage. We could be talking about other elements that need to be managed, but you're exactly right, Angela. Just because that river is running inside you doesn't mean that you just, be ignorant to it. It's the awareness and then the governance around it that really gives you the power. All right, can we just explore? So Pam, your question was to also hear from an avoid improviser, maybe, what is it like? What are the types of things that go through your minds? I think that's what you're asking. Yeah. And Peter, I think you had something you're willing to share.
Well, the number one thing, Pam, is for the avoid to improvise, I find it's permission to speak. So that's the number one thing. The reason why avoid improvisers don't talk in meeting is first, number one thing is permission to speak. We don't think it's our time to talk. So that I would put down as the first one. And then it depends, I would say, on the other drives. So
Peter, can we just ask you, what's the narrative that goes around in your mind about the permission to speak? What's the conversation you're having there?
Okay. Well, someone could ask me directly, Peter, what do you think? Or what does anyone think? Either one could work. Or if it's my field of expertise that has been talked about, and if you haven't been given that permission or that request, what are you saying to yourself that's blocking you from speaking up? It's mainly the thing. Look, I'm sitting there waiting for the others to exhaust themselves. Ian, yeah, that's exactly. Let them exhaust themselves because they're just treading water anyway. We'll let them just, get it out of their system, and then we'll get to the real issue and see if I'm patient enough to wait for that. But that's oftentimes that's sort of what it is. Ian, what do you reckon? Sounds good?
No, I was just agreeing with you. I think sometimes you actually wait for a natural pause in the conversation, and I find with some drives there isn't a natural pause. And I've often watched, in some of the webinars and other things where you can almost see the avoid improvise want to talk, but they're waiting for the right time. And I mean, that's it for Peter and I, obviously with the verify and avoid improvise, we've got the right time and to have our say. But yeah, you want to say it and you want to be heard, but you're going to wait for the timing. It's almost got to be there as well. And I think my probably avoid authenticate's coming in here as well. But I often find that I've got something to say, but I'm waiting.
So there is no negativity going around in my head.
No.
In terms of me, it's really, that's.
Okay, so I hear that. I think the negative dimension of that I hear from avoid improvisers is, well, I don't want to make a fool of myself. Like if someone asks for a contribution, well, I won't speak up yet because I don't know whether what I'm going to say is sensible, if I'm going to make a fool of myself. I don't even know. I don't know. It's too much of a risk. So I'll wait when the risk dies down. Then maybe to your point, the positive version of that is, well, I'm not at risk. I just haven't got permission yet, or I'll let them exhaust it so we can get to the real things, right? It's a different version of it.
Well, I think the other thing too is, and this is, I suppose, the flip side, is you can actually blurt. Like because it's something you need to get out on the table, and you end up blurting it, and you think, oh, that sounded so stupid, and everyone looks at you and think, oh, I won't do that again. So that's the negative side of it. It's like, oh wow, I wish I hadn't have said that. But yeah.
It's a risk avoidance drive. So clearly, if your mind feels like speaking up is a risk in any form, a risk of embarrassment, a risk of offending someone, then it's going to hold back. So it's like, what's the dialogue going inside your mind because of that?
Yeah, I don't know. It may depend on the other drives. I'm less concerned about making a fool of myself or embarrassing someone else.
But maybe that's a sign of good self-awareness, and you feel more secure and confident. So good for you. Good for you. That's really cool. As I said, just because these are here doesn't mean you need to be that they all apply to you.
Okay. Yeah. I'd like to while I'm here, I'd look at the improviser column there, and there's not much in it. See how this lands with the improviser. I have a son who one of his drives is improvise, and even when he was a boy and well before we did the ID, I've oftentimes heard from him before he would do something that I ask him to do, or that he would say, I'm not confident. And how does that sit with improvisers, the confidence bit, in terms of the negative self-talk, since this is the subject today?
I think that's a yes from Tracy.
I thought so. Yeah, good.
I don't know. Let's hear from some improvisers.
For me, this is Alessia. I'm an improviser, and for me is really a performance issue. So I need to be really good. And if I'm not super good, or the outcome is not as great as I would have liked it to be, I start thinking I'm going to fail. I'm going to screw it up. So that is really related for me to performance, because I need to make it happen. And there is when that voice starts saying, what if you don't make it happen? What if you're not so good, to make it happen? So I don't know if that's what happened, with your son, but for me, it's that. And also by nature, I'm a very, very positive person. So as soon as I have a little bit of negativity around me, a little bit of confrontation, or somebody suggesting that there may be an issue, that's when I start, that's where I really start thinking it through, and the negativity comes in. I don't know if it resonates with anybody.
100%. I feel like I could just say what you just said. I'm a 4728, but I think it's interesting as I hear you speak, it's not just that it's good, it's that it's so good, that it's super good. It's like the impression drive, right? It's like, it has to be like, for me, it has to be significant. It has to make a difference. Like, so if it's not going to be like super good, my negative self-talk is like, that's not good enough to share, but it's because I want it to be super good, not because I actually need it to be good. So that really resonated with me as you shared.
Thank you, Trace.
I wonder if there's an interesting corollary for those of us that use Verify, because we want it to be the best.
Yes, I guess the subtle difference is, and this again, one of the things I love about ID, where people can use the same words, but they're coming from a slightly different angle. Best is typically determined from comparison, right? And that's the world of verifiers. That's not where improvisers come from. It's not about comparison, because so often what they're doing has never been done before. In their mind, it's brand new. So it's about impact, not about comparison. So if you said it was the best, that probably doesn't even resonate with an improviser. Like, it's not the language of improvisers, but it's got to be like, oh my God, a wow reaction. That's what, and it's not wow about them. It's not an ego-related wow. It's wow about the impact, It might be
Yeah, Paul, I'm thinking back to college. Like, I wouldn't share in college, and I'd hear people share and I wouldn't speak up because I'm like, well, it's not that amazing, so I shouldn't share it. So like, even if I had a good point, or if it was a right point, it was like, oh, it's not that amazing. It's not going to make a significant difference to this dialogue, this conversation. It's not going to, I would just be like, okay, I won't share that then. But then I'd hear other people say things. I'm like, oh, well, if they're sharing that, I should probably share this. But but then the avoid verify was like, but I'm not the expert. I don't really know. I've never done that before. So then my avoid verify gets kicked into gear with a negative self-talk, joins in.
So again, guys, in the interest of time, I'm going to move us along. We could probably, double or triple the number of things on this page, and we will continue to put them on here, because where I think the power is in firstly realizing that if the conversation that's in your mind is ID related, there's always something you can do about it. Every vulnerability has a strategy to turn it into a strength, always. And so, whereas if you said, if your self-talk was, well, yeah, it's because of my family upbringing. I mean, I was born into a poor family. None of us went to college. And so that's why I'm always going to be, below average, or I'm just making this up, obviously, but, that could be a non-ID example. But so much of the negative self-talk that I hear people using, when I hear it, I see a link to their ID. I don't always see it linked to their environmental influences. And so I hope that if you see something here or from our conversations this week and next that you relate to, and you go, oh, that has been a part of my makeup, but now I can see it's because of my ID. please know there's something you can do about it. And whether that takes you a moment to realize it, or whether it's something you work on for several weeks to get there, it's really empowering to know that something that could have been quite limiting and disempowering can actually be managed and worked to get to a positive. Let me show you. So what I want to show you now are what some of the positive self-empowering narratives could be. So to the question that was asked of how do I turn my negatives into a positive, let's do the same exercise and add to this page, right? So you can go from saying as a verifier, I don't know this topic, to, well, what are you an expert in? To your point, Krista, what are you best at? You know, so many verifiers, the self-talk is, oh, I'll show them, you know, like as in I'll prove them wrong. They told me I'm no good. The reason I'm so good is because someone said I couldn't do it, that I wasn't good enough. And I was adamant about proving them wrong. But it's the proving them wrong piece, right? Yeah, be wrong. Someone said to me one time, when you're always wanting to be right, be wrong so that other people can be right. I mean, that was life-changing for me to think, to now have that narrative in my mind. As an avoid authenticator, as I said earlier, when I realized what matters most is what I think about me, not what other people think about me. So I check myself with, what do I think about me? And if I have a hesitation, then I deal with that. And that, again, removed all of that weight of worrying about what other people think. So there are many strategies. So many avoid improvisers will say things to me like, you know what? The harder things get, the tougher it gets. I just had a call at 7 o'clock this morning with a lady who said to me, she's 7672. That's her ID. And she said, I don't have enough crazy going on in my life. I don't have, and I said, what do you mean? She said, you know, I don't have enough tough struggle sort of stuff going on. That's when I really shine. And so whereas for some people go, oh, it's all so hard. She's one of those people who goes, yeah, but the harder it gets, the better I am, you know, and they've changed the narrative into something that's really constructive and healthy for them. So what about for you? What are the narratives that you use that you can see might be linked to your ID? Like Tracy, the word amazing, you just used it, you know, like it's not going to be amazing. And if you can change it to be like, well, I am going to say something that's amazing, maybe, yeah, or impactful. It doesn't have to just be the word amazing. But what are some examples that you might see that you use? And I see there's a bit going on in the chat, that becomes an empowering narrative for you, because that will liberate so many people. You talk about wanting to make a difference. Your contribution here might be exactly that for others.
So I put in the chat just now, and I often do say this, I can make it happen.
Right.
Just watch me.
Yeah. Yeah.
In my versions, it's never as bad as I think it's going to be.
Well, you remind me of that. I just saw something in the last monthly where someone said, my life has been full of challenges, most of which have never happened.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, who would like to share here while the chat's going on? Maybe verbalize it for us. Yeah,
I gotta say, oh, sorry, did someone just see something?
Yeah, go, Greg.
I most of the time, I goes back to uni where I'm going, well, no one else is doing anything, so I'll just jump in. You know, like I don't think I'm going to make it any worse, and so there's a sense of it. What really prompts me is, I don't know if it's a positive talk, but it's like you got to do something. It's not working, and it's like save this, fix this, help this, and then you can't shut me out.
Thank you. What about for the avoid complete? What, for those of you who are avoid complete and avoid verify, yeah, you two especially, what can you see that relates to that drive for you?
My two and complete, I feel like one of my self-empowering narratives that is helpful in my life all the time is just, there's a way around everything. Like, there's a way around everything. I'll figure out a way around it. And I feel like that helps in everything in my life. Like, that might be what you're saying, but I'm sure I can do it differently. And that is like a really good, maybe other people don't like it so much when I'm trying to get around something, but it's empowering for me, is there's a way around it. There's a way around everything.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, as you say that, it's something I've heard so many people. I can see Susie as a two incomplete relating to that as well. Yeah. And it's so true, isn't it?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the biggest, if not that we're going back to the negatives, but because I do have that mind about everything, and when, you know, I have issues, you know, even with my son at the moment, where there's just that negativity, it's like, no, it's, that little phrase, turn your frown upside down kind of thing. Like, you can, I feel you always can, like, no matter what it is. So it does my head in if people don't have that same mindset. So there's always a way.
Yeah, this too shall pass. Great point. So, and thanks, Susie. What about the avoid verify? What do you guys use? And I saw, Cliff, you had in the chat there about we're all the same. I think that's what I put in there. I think that's a very leveling concept, to feel like you're not, no one's better than you or worse than you. We're all the same at the end of the day. So it's an equalizer, Is that what you meant? Yeah.
My big thing for avoid verify that I've learned when I started writing articles, and I remember once an editor sent me an article that I was going to write on some topic, and I talked to my girlfriend who helps me with some of my editing. And I'm like, I can't write that. I'm not an expert on that. And she's like, you never tell an editor you can't write something. I'm like, but there's a lot more people that have a lot more information on that topic than I do. And she's like, Tracy, you don't have to be the expert. You don't have to be right. You just have to have an opinion. So you can write from your opinion and what you think and your experience and share your experience. It doesn't have to be the right answer. And that helps me a lot with being able to share, or is that I'm always not wanting to get it wrong, not from a verify, but from an avoid verify point of view. So when I realize, I can just share my experience, my thoughts, I don't have to be the expert, that took a lot of pressure off me as an avoid verify to be able to share more.
Beautiful. Thanks, Trace. And that, like, even just those words about, you can at least share your opinion. You don't have to be right. Like, I can just picture in a room someone saying that to, avoid verifies. And I imagine that would be liberating and just really invite you to share, to know that your opinion matters, but it's not about whether it's right. Yeah.
I'll just add to that. It just triggered a memory when I was very, very early in my career, right out of university, and I was in a consultancy, and I had that issue of just working with clients and feeling like I didn't know for sure, and I didn't have the right answer, and it had to be right before I said anything. My mentor at the time said to me, you don't need to know the answers, all of the answers, you just need to know where to find them. And that was just liberating for me from that point forward, and I've never forgotten it. So yeah, same kind of thing, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. And so what about the completers? When you get stuck or you feel overwhelmed because it's always and everyone and so on, what do you use to combat that? How do you turn that? What's the positive there?
They can't do this without me. Which is I think is part of the integral, maybe your first point, as in I know I'm a part of that's needed. So
and Krista, is the reverse. If you feel they can do something without you, does that push you away?
Yes, but then that's maybe where maybe something else kicks in, because then from my use authenticate, if I'm not needed, that's fine. But if I know I'm needed, whether they see it or not, I'll hang in and try and be more constructive about it. And
yeah, that concept of being integral And I often had the picture people said to me, it's like I'm at the hub of the wheel, you know, and it's not because I want to control everything. It's not about control. It's just about being integral to the experience or to the work.
Yeah, Paul, I use the one, this is normal, especially in a team environment where you find you'll get different emotions and people responding to, well, I'm annoyed or they're upset. And just to understand that emotion is normal. Now, what are you going to do with that emotion? You're going to let it destroy what you're doing or be creative? So the same thing applies to me, is this is normal. I don't like it. And it's a journey. A little bit what Greg said before. It too shall pass, but it's normal. It's part of normal activity dealing with people. So therefore, yeah, just keep at it, keep with the plan and keep going.
Do you find as a completer, you're always redefining normal, Steve?
What's normal, Paul? Gee, we're in a changing world with so much going on. They always say the only constant thing around here is change. So like normal is learning the skill sets of how to adjust, I suppose, is the bigger challenge. Eh?
Yeah. The plan is to have no plan.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I wondered because it's such a, whilst, you know, there are so many components of each drive, the concept of normal is such a huge driver for completers. And yet it's like the word right for a verifier. The word right is such a driver, but what does right mean, you know, and what does normal mean? So I would imagine just like for a verifier, they're always having to redefine right so that it's not one that becomes offensive to others. I would imagine normal is one that the completers need to constantly redefine so you can continue having harmony with other people.
Hey, Paul, I have a question about a drive that I have, and I think I use Authenticate, but I'm not sure. It's wanting to have the root cause before I try to solve something. Like if I'm not clear on what the real problem is or what the core issue is, you know, it's that is what I search for first before I try to solve.
Yes. So it's interesting the language you use, because the concept of root cause is typically the home of a verifier. Mm-hmm. And this is what I found when I was developing the ID. I'd hear language and I'm like, oh, sounds like you're a verifier. Then I'd hear something else and I go, oh, no, that's not what it is. And so when you dig deeper, we call it level 4 questioning. So you sort of go, well, what do you mean by root cause? Yeah. You know, and you dig into it. We have the benefit now of knowing your ID, Angela, and we can say, okay, so you're 5628. So it's not really, you're not coming from a place of verify of getting to root cause. It's probably wanting to make sure, to your point, not only your Authenticate drive, but your whole ID. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it once.
And it has to have meaning. So if I'm applying the wrong solution, if I'm not applying the right solution, it's wasteful to me.
Right, which is Authenticate and exacerbated by your whole ID. But what I love about what you're sharing is it's not like solving something to root cause can only be done by the verifiers.
Right.
You're a great example here of someone else can get into it and get to root cause because they're wanting to tackle the real issue, not waste time and energy, get it done right the first time, and therefore let's make sure we're dealing with the real issue. You know, the verifier is coming from a different place.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Guys, we're out of time. This has been a really interesting conversation. I hope for those of you who came to this meeting with, you know, maybe some examples in your mind of things that you want to address around the self-sabotaging narratives, you can see from this very last slide that we have up, there are ways, but it's not that you can get rid of it. It's a vulnerability means you've got to manage it. So you might have to work for a while at consciously replacing the negative narrative with some of these more constructive, empowering narratives. But I promise you that as you do this and are more in stride, you can absolutely have a life like what Ian experienced, where the positive narrative overtakes and just lets you experience real joy from what you're doing. So we will dig into this more when we have our masterclass in a couple of weeks. Please come back and we'll talk about the whole ID approach, and we'll be working through some specific use cases as well, so you can dig into it personally and get some real personal takeaway value as well. Thanks for being here today. Have a great rest of the day. We look forward to seeing you next time. Take care, everybody.